Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel for another flight. And as you can see here, we're going to be using the AS350, and the area we're in is the Monroe-Custer area, which the airport code is going to be KTTF. And as you see, we have the helisimmer livery, which is this is actually the modified version, so the outside is the same as what you would find on the website, but the interior, as you can see, is the modified version that I added. So if you're interested in that, you can get both the original if you want to go to the helisimmer website, or if you would like this modified version, you can find this on the Facebook groups. I have links there, or you can go to my profile page on the forums, the .org forums. So now that'll be under the alias account of Jekyll, which should be fairly easy to find. So to get started here, we're going to dump the rotor brake. Let our RPM come back up to the low idle point. And once that levels off, then we'll add in the full throttle. With some rudder pedal, obviously, to counteract, since it does kind of kick in rather rough. And this is basically just really not a scenery tour, not really a demo of the aircraft. This is more or less just a fly for fun, so it's a joyride basically, but generally people seem to enjoy the AS350, so I think this should be a good one. So let's go ahead and get started here. Of course, we have some nice weather. There's really no wind, it's not that cloudy, so nice early morning flight. And I was actually going through the message inbox a little earlier and was noticing that the questions, or comments rather too, still seem to come through, that people seem to paint this aircraft with the reputation as being, if not impossible to fly, extremely difficult. And as I've said, on many occasions, I don't believe that is necessarily 100% true. I do believe it's difficult in the sense there's a learning curve, but in my experience, and of course, my opinion of this is that most of the difficulty and the trouble is really caused by some pretty simple issues that can be resolved and really are not so much to do with skill on part of the pilot, but rather to do with improperly setting things up and not realizing what you're doing wrong. So I don't want to be self-patronizing, but it's really just a matter of not paying attention, or really putting that much effort into trying to figure out what it is it's making it difficult. So you just blame it on the model and don't take into account that it could be an error on the user's behalf. So generally what these errors come down to is, number one, I would say, would be improper setup of the physical controller itself. So this would be number one, if you have a spring self-centering device, having that set high or really it's best to eliminate it completely. You don't really want that spring tension. That can also be known as force feedback. So that's probably the number one problem. And I would say the number two problem, which is maybe not hardware related necessarily, but that is that, people will try to fly this model and they will have difficulty and, will be immediately just overwhelmed, and they will do usually one of two things. And number one is quit, completely give up, not even try, and consider it to be out of their league. And number two is they will go into the settings and put it on arcade mode, or add excessive amounts of stability to it or whatever. And the first one I absolutely frown upon. I really don't like the arcade mode because it tends to keep you at a pretty good hover, straight line in your heading. But let's say, for instance, you want to do a very deep bank or something, of this nature, it would actually make that very hard because it would constantly be fighting back and trying to level the helicopter out. So it fights back almost like force feedback in a way. So it interferes. And then with the stability, I'm not 100% against that. The stipulation being that if you just have a lot of difficulty with a model, you can set that to, let's say, a baseline of 25%, which is more than enough. I mean, that's a lot of stability. But what you need to try to do is have the goal of using that only as sort of training wheels, if you will, so that as you're learning, little by little you reduce that. So you go from 25 to 22, and then go to 20, 15, 10, and so on until eventually you reach the goal of 0. And so if you're using the augmentation because you're having difficulty, and at the same time you're setting a goal for yourself that you only want to use this as a temporary aid to ultimately reach full control, then sure, by all means, I have no problem with that. Yeah. But one thing that I will promise, and I do believe this could be guaranteed across the board, is that if you do put the willpower and the determination and the time and practice into learning this model, and you don't even have to master it, just if you become proficient, to the baseline in this model, you will probably find that, quite contrary to your original thoughts, it's actually a really easy model to fly, in the sense that it is so agile, it's so reactive, that it does, exactly what you tell it to do, when you tell it to do it, and does nothing but that. So, I definitely recommend learning to fly this particular model. I mean, even I had trouble. I mean, it took me a long time to actually get used to it and figure everything out. So even coming in with the background that I have, that, with the 412, everything else that I'd already done, it's still, even presented a bit of a challenge to me. So, don't be discouraged if you have trouble with it. It's definitely not you, for instance. It's just you're trying to transition into a very unique experience. So now, if you're interested in this model, if you don't already have it, my advice would really be, if you can wait till the new version comes out, because this model is really designed for X-Plane 10, so it's not truly fully integrated and compatible with version 11 yet. So I would say, if you can, it'd be best to wait, because they are actually working on an X-Plane 11 version, and from what I've saw and heard, it's actually going to be pretty awesome machine. So So definitely wait if you can. If not, if you're, just hell-bent on getting the model and you don't want to wait, or also, very important, if you have X-Plane 10 and you're still using X-Plane 10, then, sure, by all means, because I can almost guarantee that the new version that'll work for X-Plane 11 absolutely will not work in X-Plane 10. So if you want to stick with 10, or maybe if you want to do like I do, where I have 3 versions, I have 9, 10, and 11, and use all of them, for different things at different times, then sure, it wouldn't hurt to have the older version as well. And like I say, even though it'll work perfectly in 10, it'll still function in 11. It just obviously won't be anywhere near as good as the new one that's supposed to be coming out. I think another tip that I could probably give, and it wouldn't really be specific to this model, it'd be any model really, but I would say that it would be, overwhelmingly apply to this model more than others, which, would be to not overfly the aircraft. Because I noticed that, especially with my students, a lot of times they seem to have a reactionary based approach, and you really don't want to have a reactionary based approach to the helicopter. As default, you definitely want to know how to react to certain situations that you could run into. But, as far as flying the aircraft, it's best that you're more of a proactive. So instead of, making a turn and waiting to see how the helicopter is going to react to that, anticipate that and actually always be one step ahead. So, don't be thinking about what's happening now, be thinking about what you want to do next, if that makes sense. And I guess the other, in reference to that reaction, don't be so tense and, so quick to try to react to every little movement, because if you try to fix every little twitch, every little swing, every little drift that the helicopter has, number one, you're going to dirt nap eventually, and number two, it's impossible. As I've said with many other models, find your heading, maintain that, keep a safe altitude, avoid obstacles, look for cables, power lines, things like that, but don't over-concentrate on, tiny deviations caused by turbulence or wind or, what have you, or a little bit of drift. If you're 150 feet away from an obstacle and the helicopter drifts 3 feet closer, it's not a big deal. So don't try to always maintain this, precise distance. If you're a safe distance away, fine, don't become too complacent. Just drift until, you basically bury the helicopter in the side of a building somewhere, but, don't overreact. Because, if the helicopter drifts and you jerk the controller to try to, right the helicopter, it's going to do exactly what you say, but you may not be necessarily ready for how closely it's going to actually, respond to the command that you're giving. Because if you make a very quick jerk in the controller, it's going to move the helicopter very quickly, and it doesn't take much for that to turn into a situation of losing control. And usually once things start to go downhill, they tend to, cascade and a domino effect. So you don't really even want to get into an error scenario. You know, outside of something like an engine failure, a flame out, you know, running out of fuel, something of that nature, rotor brakes sticking, you know, rotor pedal sticking, you know, something that would require you to perform like an auto rotation. You know, aside from that, you really don't want to get yourself into any of those situations. And obviously auto rotation is not a routine maneuver. I mean, that's a worst case scenario really. So practice them, obviously, but don't rely on it. You know, don't become so comfortable that you just say, oh well, I don't have to pay attention, because if it goes wrong I'll just auto rotate. Because if you see right now the altitude I'm flying at, if I lose an engine right now, I'm not going to auto rotate. It's not possible. You know, so I'm pretty much going to dirt nap, because I'm well below the dead man's curve at this point. So, you know, this type of flying here takes an extreme amount of concentration and confidence, because, like I say, you know, even though I can safely operate at this altitude, I have no margin for error. So if I lose an engine, if I have a flame out, if I have a rotor strike, something of that nature, then it's pretty much, you know, 15 different kinds of bad is about all that's going to happen. But there's no real way to recover. Then it becomes more of a hope for the best that you don't end up, you know, rolling down the field here, you know, in a ball of flames. But you're going to lose the helicopter. You're going to break some bones. You're going to have some cuts. So, you know, this very low altitude, nap of the earth, treetop level type flying, you know, has its purpose. You know, police surveillance, sometimes medevac, the military, you know, they'll use it as sort of a, you know, keeps them below the radar, things like that. But it comes at a price. You know, like I say, you lose that margin for error very quickly. So really, let's say the safe would be, I would have to actually go above the curve here, get into a margin where I would have room for auto rotation, which is going to be something closer to this. So as you can see, there's nothing wrong with this, unless, for instance, I'm trying to, you know, sling load something, lower a, you know, a swimmer into the water, rescue, something like that, or do, you know, police tracking a, you know, high-speed chase, something like that. So you can see what I mean by the fact that, you know, yes, this is much safer, because I almost have enough of a, you know, enough altitude to guarantee me that margin for error. But, you know, this also means there are certain operations that you just can't do from this level, so it's always a compromise between, you know, weighing the risk against the benefit. So I would say in general, most, you know, most flight plans and things you would do would never really operate at the lower altitudes. So unless you go into something specialty, you know, like what I'm talking about with sling loading, or into something, you know, to do with rescue, surveillance, or military. Otherwise, this is more the type of thing you're going to be doing. So it's a lot of fun. You can practice it if you want to, but, you know, don't make it the norm. And speaking of the lessons, I'm not sure if anyone is interested, but I did recently have 3 of the students who actually graduated from the one-on-one, and they're in the stage of doing their lessons themselves now and sending results for evaluation. So there are 3 slots that are open if anyone is interested in that. And it's, totally an honor-based thing. So, I mean, if you can't afford it, it doesn't cost you a dime. Because we have I have a way to sort of compensate and take care of that. But, as always, if you want to donate something, then you're more than welcome to do that. But it's entirely up to you. The lessons are, by default, completely free. And the limitations are you have to be over 12. Basically that's about it. Preferably over 16, but if you're over 12 to 16, then you'll need to have parent or guardian permission. And I consider that you'll get a contract and everything at the beginning that will work through all that. So that's just for safety reasons, for yours and mine as well. So yeah, if anyone's interested, like I say, there are 3 spots open, and those include one-on-one lessons using both network flying, control station type stuff, and simply conversations, one-on-one answering questions, things like that. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can contact me and let me know. But like I say, it is limited to 25 slots, and like I say, right now there are 3 open. So if you're interested in doing that, then you can get in contact with me, and I will, evaluate your case and see if we can't get you into that. And start heading back towards Custer now. I think this flight's about finished. I got most of the questions answered and the topics covered that I was wanting to do. So that's why I said this was more of a joyride, since it was really an opportunity to try to get the information out and answer some of the questions from previous posts. And if you do have a question, a comment, something like that, it's just not related to the lessons, whatever you just have about a flight or a general question, you can leave those in the comment section. You can post those to my Facebook or one of my Facebook groups, or if you prefer email, you can email me at msmithflight, and that's at gmail.com. And usually I can respond within 24 hours, and usually much less than that, depending on the workload. But, I'm always willing to take any question from anyone, and I will try to answer them. So, as long as you keep in mind that, I'm only one person. So, like I say, you may need to give me as much as 24 hours to answer, or respond, or acknowledge, if you will. Speaking of low altitudes, you can actually get really low here. Like I say, you gotta watch for the electrical lines, because they could definitely spell bad news for a helicopter if you get a rotor to go into that. And even if you do have cable cutters, they still require that the cable either be hit below the chin or slightly above the top of the windshield usually. So it's still not a you know, a fail-safe system. It's, you know, that's why I guess prevention is the best system to try to follow. And on the 412 we actually have a system called FlySafe, which it actually picks up the electromagnetic signature and gives an audible warning to let you know when you're close to a high voltage line. But unfortunately, you know, if it's a telephone line or just some sort of a stringer cable or something like that, it really doesn't work. But it will work for electrical cables at least. But for, you know, normal flight, you should watch for them and avoid them. But you know, in the 412, that's used because of the fact of the sling loading and things, which keep us at a kind of a low altitude. And a lot of times, you know, you'll be very close to high voltage. And a lot of times you may even have an operator on the outside of the helicopter, so that would be very bad news, you know. It would be very easy to end up killing a man if you're not careful with that. Should be coming up on our destination here in a minute now. Thought it was right over this stand of trees. I don't see the green light anymore. No, there we go. I see a beacon. Put it down in the grass over here just a second, because I have another project that's going to be coming up that'll require having this open bay, so might as well go ahead and get close to that. Alright guys, that concludes this flight, so I do appreciate everyone watching, and as I mentioned before, if you want to get into the lessons, we have 3 openings. Otherwise, if you have questions, comments, you know, anything of that nature, you can use the comment section below. You can go to Facebook, or you can email me at msmithflight, and that's at gmail.com. And the livery, if you're interested in that, you can get the stock original from the Hilo Center website, which is definitely something worth checking out. They have a lot of good information there. Or if you want the modified version, you can go to my page at the forums, and that's going to be under the username Jekyll, which is the alias that I use there. So anyway, until next time guys, I do appreciate watching, and I'll see you later.